Characteristics of sheep in Appendix A. Is everybody there? It's kind of a long one. Timid, fearful, easily panicked, dumb, stupid, and gullible. I don't really like using the S word, but that's what Wiki was all about. So, very vulnerable to fear, frustration, pests, hunger, easily influenced by a leader, by the shepherd. They stampede easily. They're vulnerable to mob psychology. Little or no means of self-defense, can only run. Kind of picture some of your children right now at different stages of life, and this is going to make a lot of sense. Number 6, little or no means of self-defense, can only run. Sorry, we're on 7. Easily killed by enemies. The shepherd is most effective calming influence. Jealous and competitive for dominance, and some shepherds of churches and congregations can tell you that can be very so in some congregations. 10, constantly need fresh water and fresh pasture. 11, have very little discernment in choosing food or water. Best water source is early morning dew. They're perverse and stubborn. They'll insist on their own way, even eating poisonous plants or drinking dirty water. Is that the picture of a prodigal or what? They're easily, this part is what gets me the most about the shepherd, because I think of this vulnerability here and how the shepherd goes. It's easily cast, flipped over on their back. When a sheep, how many of you knew that when a sheep is flipped over, they can't flip themselves back over again? How many of you knew that? Raise your hands if you knew that. I didn't know that. And I was just amazed when I learned this. It says, will die of starvation if not turned over by shepherd. They're helpless. Does that make sense now when we read the parable about how he was willing to leave the 99 to go after the one that was astray? Because he knew that they wouldn't be able to come back. If they had been cast, there's no way they could make their way back into the flock. And so that's why the shepherd's heart is to go after that one that has gone astray. If any of you have children that have gone astray, you know that your focus sometimes is not on the children that are doing well. Your focus is on the child that's not doing well. Why? Because that's where the shepherd's heart is focused, on the one that has been cast and is not making their way back into the flock. 15, frequently look for easy places to rest. I have a friend whose daughter used to fall asleep in the laundry basket. 16, don't like to be sheared or cleaned. Some of the teenage boys are like that, right? They don't like to get in the shower. Too much wool can cause sheep to be easily cast. Creatures of habit, they get into ruts. They need the most care of all livestock. So he didn't call us cows. He called us sheep for a reason. Need to be on the move, need a predetermined plan and a pattern of grazing. Totally dependent on shepherd for every need, and they need the rod and staff guidance. Isn't that amazing? And then it's no wonder that we're compared to sheep, is it? I don't think it's demeaning at all. I think what it is it shows us our vulnerability, and it shows us the vulnerability of our seed, our children that we're raising up, and this culture, how vulnerable we really are, and how much guidance we need from the Good Shepherd. So your first fill in there is the job of a shepherd is to make sure the pastures are green and edible. Sheep get restless. And if they do not have green pastures or fresh water, they're prone to wander. That's your next fill in. They're prone to wander. A sheep that feels threatened or unsafe will be in danger of straying. Isn't that just awesome? That's his heart for us as his flock, as his people, and that should be our heart towards those that the Lord has given us to shepherd, namely our children. So a sheep that feels threatened or unsafe will be in danger of straying. And similarly, a child who doesn't have his or her needs, basic needs met, will be in constant condition of need or want. That's your next fill-in, need or want. They'll be in constant condition of need or want. I want to take just a little moment here to ask you to be sensitive to the children that are in your life that are not your own children. As Tom said, we are called to be a light. Our families are called to be a light. There's children in our neighborhood who aren't being watched over, and they're in danger of straying. And we have that perfect opportunity, don't we? And I can remember as a young mom and having a lot of children come to my house, and at first being like, why aren't you home? And then it was like the Lord gave me this glorious revelation. These children are here for you to influence. And so we had little Bible clubs and little parties for them. And the parents were just as pleased as punch that I would take care of them. And so it was a wonderful opportunity. And I can remember my little girls being on our gravel yard with their Bibles, trying to teach these children about how much they needed the Lord. And so here's a wonderful opportunity for children that are straying. And a tragic situation in our neighborhood was that here was my house, and right behind me was the house of a girl who had been left alone by her parents, and she was in her home, latchkey child. She was there all the time by herself. And when I wasn't home, some of these children that weren't being shepherded properly by their moms and dads were going back. When they'd try my home first, and if I wasn't home, they'd go behind. And that little child, who was only 10 or 11, was molesting the neighborhood children that had been wandering. And so if you see children that are wandering and astray, and the Lord puts it on your heart to give them that cup of cold water or that ice pop or just a hug, and of course we want to be sensitive and discerning in this, but I think we need to be able to see those opportunities that are around us in our neighborhoods. So, and because the shepherd knows that these sheep are so vulnerable, if they're not eating properly, if they're not resting properly, if there's not enough fresh water, if there's prey around that makes them feel unsafe, that would cause them to wander. Because the shepherd knows that, he anticipates the needs of the sheep prior to them having that need. Does that make sense? Before they're going to have that need. Your child is going into adolescence. There's going to be some hormones fluctuating, especially if you have a girl. But we're seeing more with men now, too, and young boys now. We're seeing a lot more of that happening. It's the hot dogs. I don't know. So prior to that need being a reality, a good shepherd anticipates it and provides and prepares and protects for those seasons. Our job as a parent is to discern the root causes of our children's excessive behavior and evaluate the possible deficiency. So we trust the Holy Spirit, our counselor, to help us in the evaluating process. And so I wanted to talk about 3 major areas of focus to consider in evaluating your children's needs. There's 3 major areas because we're made up of spirit, soul, and body. There's 3 areas that need to be ministered to. And as parents, sometimes we neglect one or more of those areas. Now I'm going to say here, and I believe this is page 8 in the booklet, as we start the first one, the spiritual needs of your children. I think it's page 8 in the booklets. In the handout, it's 5. The absence of spiritual training is the most tragic of all parenting mistakes. And we're starting with spiritual because it's the most important part of your child's being is their spirit. And so I want to say that we can raise, as Tom said, the most educated, intelligent children who stand head and shoulders above the rest of society. We can raise emotionally intelligent children, and that's a great thing. They're going to cope well in this life and learn to be more resilient. We can raise athletes that are going to make it to the Olympics, or piano players that astound their audience. All of this is wonderful, but if they gain the whole world and they lose their own souls, is that not tragic? I can't think of anything more tragic, but if we can raise a child who's mighty in spirit and strong in spirit, men of valor, women of grace, they'll make their mark on eternity. And isn't that what should matter more than anything else, is what our children do to influence eternity? And as I'm sharing about this, I think of some of the women that came to our home, that graced our home, and some of the abuses that they had been through physically, emotionally, and in their lives, they felt like damaged goods. And those of you that are fostering, those of you that are adopting, those of you that are in that situation, that's how children can feel when they come to you, like damaged goods. And so that's why if we let them know that the spirit is the most important part of who they are, and that's the part that Satan can't touch, that spirit will heal every other part that's been damaged. Does that make sense? If they learn to be mighty in spirit, then they can become whole in those parts that have been damaged. And so that's the hope that I see, no matter what's happened to us, no matter what's happened to them, the hope that I see is if we connect with them spiritually, if we teach them to connect with their Father, their Heavenly Father, we teach them that there's an Abba that's there for them, then we've done the most wonderful thing that we can do for our children so that they can understand the concept of a mighty spirit and how it will help all those other parts of their body and their emotions as well. So, first fill in. What is their spiritual diet? Is their environment feeding or starving their spirit? And so we have there in parentheses movies, books, peers, music, fellowship, TV, the general atmosphere of the home. What is it like? And you as a parent have to pray, and you as a parent have to decide what kind of atmosphere. Do I want them watching TV? I know people that don't even have TVs. But there's other things going on in the home that can be a bad influence. So let's look at how does the Lord want us to create an atmosphere that's going to make it an atmosphere where their spirits can grow, their spirits can thrive. So the suggestions and all, I'm preaching to the choir here because I know all of you, many of you are already doing these things. And so children need a steady diet of the Word, devotion books, character studies, Bible reading, Christian movies and music. So they need a steady diet of that. And teaching our children, number 2, about the plight of others can be a very rewarding investment. You know, as Tom said, let's not just raise our children, us four and no more. We're just raising our children for success in the world. Let's raise our children understanding that there's a world out there, and many people need our encouragement, our help. Many people need to be touched in a very real way, and that the Lord can use us to do that. And so I always had a map around. I always had a world map around so that we remember it's not just us. There's a world out there. And we would make maps. We would. There was a book that taught you prayer for the world, and there we go through country by country. We would read about the culture of that country, the religion that was dominating that country, and we would learn a little bit about them. And then we would make a flag of that country, and we would put the flag up on the fridge. And then we would pray for the country for a month, for a week, whatever we had chosen. And we would just systematically go through that as we did our homeschooling. And another really good resource is Voices of the Martyrs. And they, of course, are highlighting for us the plight of the persecuted church in many, many parts of the world. They used to have a children's magazine. They don't anymore. I wish they did. But they do have prayer maps that you can order. There are booklets and magazines that you can order from them, and they come monthly. And then you can translate into the language that you think your children can handle about the persecuted church. You do the translating for them. But it's very important, I think, that children understand that there's a world out there that's very difficult, that's nothing like the world that we're in right now. You know, we cry because somebody's upset because they, we're wearing a cross and they made fun of us, and we go home and cry. they're getting their heads chopped off in other nations. There's so many more things happening. And we're entering into a time in this nation where there's more persecution than there ever has been, and I think it's going to escalate. We need to prepare our children for that. But I think one of the things we need to show them is that there's people we can touch, people that are in very challenging situations that we can touch. Visit a local nursing home or make a meal for an elderly neighbor or widow. So look around. What are the needs right in front of you? And don't just do it as a parent. Do it as a family. Bake cookies for the neighbors that just moved in and go as a family and welcome them. If somebody's not feeling well, make them a meal and go over and talk with them and share with them, offer to pray with them. Number 3, make sure that you and your children are active and consistent in a healthy and caring body of believers. And I add there, support your leadership, no complaining, because it's really important that you as shepherds are supportive of your shepherds. Because if you're not, whatever you're speaking and saying in the home, if you're degrading, demeaning, complaining, or whining about your leadership, guess who's going to be doing it 10 years from that? It's really important that we can be supportive of the leadership that we're in and under. And so finding that fellowship, I think, is important because your children have gifts and you have gifts and other people have gifts to give to you. So having that consistent fellowship is important. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into the emotional aspect of our children and the needs that they have emotionally. Chris and Carmen, I don't know if they left one there, but they have a book called The 5 Love Languages, I think, of teens and of children. So that might be very beneficial. So the first fill-in under emotional is don't ever assume that what your child is asking for is what he or she really wants. And this would mostly be with young children, if you can understand that. I'll give you an example, having teen moms and then having them grow and come and visit with me, and some of them are still single, and they're trying to chat with me, and the little ones are tugging at mama, and I have to go to the bathroom 3 times, and I need a water, and I need a drink, and I need this, and I need that. And then you see the frustration rising in the mom. And then just stop for a moment, and with one of them in particular, I said, have you had a busy week? Have you been on the phone a lot, or has something been going on? Yes. Trying to call DES, or trying to call this, or trying to call this organization, trying to organize this. I said, so I don't think she really needs water or bathroom. I think she just needs a little connection with you. So we can stop our discussion, connect. Now, I'm not saying that you don't teach children not to be disrespectful, but we also need to see that sometimes children need to be nourished in an area, and if you don't nourish that area, they're going to continue with that annoying behavior, that pesty behavior. So sometimes the right thing is to teach that child to wait. Sometimes the right thing is for you as an adult to say, we can continue this, maybe in another time, especially if the child is exhausted or hungry or whatever. But in this case, the child was lacking an emotional connection with mom. She was an amazing parent. When she lived with us, she was so connecting with her child. She did those 3 P's of parenting so beautifully. And so I knew that something was different, something was off, and able to look at that and say, okay, something's not right here, because this is not usually, what's going on. So just look at those situations. And then walking your children through challenges, not eliminating them, is essential for their emotional maturity. And we can look back to Psalm 23:4. The shepherd walks us through. He doesn't cause us to fly over. We walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And that's really challenging when you have a child that gets to that age where they're really fearful of things. And in different ages, they'll be fearful of different things. It's being accepted maybe as an adolescent, but as a child, it's fear of the boogeyman, fear of what's not really there. And so I remember as a parent that I would get frustrated because my child wouldn't take a nap, and then it took me a little while to realize she wasn't taking a nap, not because she needed water or food or whatever those other things are, but she started to get into that fear stage. And so I wasn't addressing it. I was just frustrated and reacting to the fact that she wasn't obeying me. And I wasn't really looking at what was the issue there. So, and she wasn't obeying me. Again, we have to be very discerning as we evaluate. We don't ignore rebellious behavior. I'm not saying to do that. I'm just saying, as a parent, look at where the deficiency might be to correct it. And then, of course, when you're applying discipline, you take that into consideration. So I'm not trying to say here, and we're going to get into discipline a little bit later. One of the things I think is important, and again, this has to be your style. You have to decide this for yourself. But when my children would come in and they would be afraid at night, I wouldn't let them get in my bed, because I wanted to teach them that there was no boogeyman in their room. So if they came in and they were afraid, I went, as much as we don't really want to get up, right? We would prefer. I had one daughter that used to just crawl in really, really lightly, because she knew if I heard her, I was going to address the fear. But go into their room. Be a good shepherd and walk them through the valley of the shadow of death. Take them back into the room that they're afraid of. With my grandchildren, I just kind of make a joke of it. Is there a boogeyman under the bed? Is there a boogeyman in the closet? No, there's no boogeyman. Then they start laughing and they're ready to go to bed, and they're fine for the night. But really understanding that whatever challenge it might be, whatever your children is facing, whatever season of life that they're in, there's going to be challenges everywhere they go in all of those seasons. And if we keep taking them out of those challenges and we never allow them to struggle through it, then we haven't really done them any favors, and we really haven't prepared them for life's experiences, have we? So my kids used to jump in bed like we'd have, okay, this Friday we're all going to have fun night in the room and camp out in mom's bed or whatever. But it was for fun. It wasn't because they were afraid. Does that make sense? And again, all of you have to decide those things for yourself. If you're a really tired mom and you just can't handle it and you bring that baby in bed, it's okay. But I'm just saying, let's look at the overall picture here of what do we really want to reflect to our children. So I have under there as well, entering into your child's world versus bringing them into yours. And if there was the biggest mistake that I ever made, it's this one, emotionally with my children. The biggest mistake we can make is thinking your children are all like you. Like their personality and everything, the way they think, everything is just like you. And that was the biggest mistake that I made. And so here we were as not just parents of 3 daughters at the time, but parents of these pregnant girls, and we would be invited to churches to go share the mission of what we were doing. And, we'd get our little 15-passenger van, our big 15-passenger van, and we would go into the churches. I was so proud of these girls. I mean, they kept their babies. These girls were so precious to me. I couldn't believe what they had been through. So they were like little heroes to me. And unbeknownst to me, one of my children was terribly embarrassed, because if there was a potluck, they were heaping up the food. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's doing that. I didn't know any of that. Here I am, proud of all these beautiful teenagers, and here's one of my children that didn't even get to express to me, this is a little shaming to me. They're not behaving properly. They're not being respectful to people. They came with baggage. I didn't even realize how much that baggage would affect this one daughter of mine. Didn't even realize it. But it was affecting her. And so I was assuming, oh, everybody's just proud of these girls. We're just such a happy little family. And so that was one of the mistakes that I made. And I did it in other areas, just assuming that somebody would respond to something the way I would respond to something. And so try to, rather than pulling your children into your world, try to get into their world a little bit, asking some questions, being a little bit more aware, and finding out how they're thinking through things. A relative comes, and finding out, well, do they like that relative? Do they feel a little nervous or intimidated around the relative? How do they feel when the relative is gone? Just looking at all of those things and making sure we are aware of the emotional needs of our children. So, suggestions: find out what is special and unique to each child and give them time to express their needs, and teach them how to express their needs in an appropriate way. So, if you don't ever spend time with them, how can they express their needs in an appropriate way? If you're concerned that your children are always interrupting you, but you're always on the phone, or you're always talking to somebody, and you're never available for them emotionally, what other choices do they have if we're not making any connections with them emotionally? And so, if you can, even if it's a brief connection, if you can make that connection with them, and then teach them how to express those needs in an appropriate way instead of yelling and screaming. And I know you see with children as they get, 4, 5, 6. The sixth one is always louder than the fifth one, and the seventh one is always louder. And it's because there's so many, they have to let their voice be heard. And so we have to be sensitive to that. Visit to the local library. I know a lot of people don't use libraries anymore, and that might be a little too old-fashioned for all of you, but I love the idea of going to the library, learning to be quiet, especially you homeschooling parents. If your children never learn to be quiet, and it's okay to do whatever you want in homeschool, they don't understand the value of being in a situation where they have to be quiet. So the other thing I love about the library is you can teach them discernment, so you can have them pick some books, and then a lot of times they'll come to, is this one okay? Oh, there's a witch in this one. Your values are what you're going to express to your children, right? And so that's a perfect opportunity for you to express some of those values and teach them how to be discerning. There was a little girl who grabbed some books out of a nursery one time and brought them to her mom and said, these shouldn't be in the nursery. Shame on us for having them in the nursery. But I think that's awesome to see that discernment in the little ones. The other thing I love teaching about the library is let them get their own library card as soon as they can write their name, sign their name, and then give them a little book bag. We used to do that. We used to just color a book bag. They'd color their own book bag, and then we'd take their own little private book bag to the library, and then they'd take as many books as they can fill in the book bag, so you make sure you don't get a really big one, and then see how they steward the property that belongs to somebody else. So teach them how to be good stewards. And then, of course, if they lose a book, then you can have a whole new lesson on how you have to pay for the book. Or a mercy lesson. I'll pay for it this time. Other free activities that you can enjoy, and of course I did this because a lot of my single moms were limited in what they could afford to do with their children. So a lot of times in the library they have newspapers that inform of public events in the community that are free. So that's always a nice thing to look at. And then also, on point number 4, children love to do things with their family. Even cleaning time can be made into a family activity. Do not minimize this. It is amazing. I mean, we have a 3,000 square foot home, and we'd have as many as 13 children or 14 children. We had cleaning day together, and we put the music on, and we had a ball. I'm telling you, we had fun. We actually had fun cleaning the house together. And then because I was raising these young women to be mommies and keepers of their own homes someday, I actually went beyond the call of duty and taught them how to do deep cleaning, how to take the curtains off, and how to deep clean the refrigerator. And would you know that I don't know how many girls came back to me and said, thank you for teaching me that. They were so blessed to learn something that they had never learned themselves. And so don't minimize the cleaning days together. Doing it as a family can really make it a fun chore, believe it or not. Lengthy car rides can be a great time to sing, talk, and pray when time is short. One of the single moms that we were working with, she drove her children to a private school that she was sending them to, where she got a scholarship, and she made that the devotion time. That was the only devotion time she could have with the children, and she made it was like their car was a little presence of the Spirit of God. It was a safe place every day, there and back, talking about the Lord, talking about what happened that day, praying, thanking God, doing little lessons in the car, doing Bible memory work, and that was their special time together. So be creative with your time, especially those of you that are single and struggle with that, or those of you who have husbands that are gone quite often. That's something that you can remember. And then meal times, of course, are a great time to connect. Now we're going to go into the physical. And the first fill-in is, what are you feeding your children? This is one of the fun ones. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but again, on the web, we want to make sure that we're helping people to understand that may not have been taught these things. And so avoid processed fast foods as much as possible. More processing means fewer vitamins. Learn to read labels. So I'm going to do something fun here. So if I can have a willing participant come up and read the label on Uncle Ben's Flavor Infusion Rice. Who would like to do that? Okay, Sam, come on. She's getting an early start on the parenting. She's here enjoying our course now. Yes, I need you to read the ingredients nice and loud and maybe look that way. There you go.
So for ingredients, we've got long grain parboiled rice, seasoning blend, hydrolyzed soy protein, and wheat gluten, salt, garlic powder, natural flavors, includes milk, maltodextrin, hydrolyzed yeast, that's a new one, extract, onion powder, gum arabic, then we got mustard, turmeric, for coloring apparently, iron phosphate, nicotinamide, possibly, thiamine, and monotrate, as well as folic acid.
And that wasn't even half as bad as some of those. So the moral of the story is if you can't read it, you probably shouldn't eat it. So anyway, just learn to read labels. I mean, as a ministry, whatever we got blessed with, we just trusted the Lord, okay? So you're either trusting God to help process what you just put in, or you're trusting Him for money to buy organic food, okay? Either way, it's a faith trip, right? And so, but I thought that was interesting. So now, Sam, if you can read this one.
So let's see. Old-fashioned, supposedly 100% whole grain oats.
Okay.
For ingredients, we've got whole grain rolled oats. One ingredient.
So do you understand how reading labels is important? This is cheap, okay? And some of you may want to buy organic oatmeal, and that's okay. Sprouts, bulk places, they have those things. And some children won't eat oatmeal. Some children won't eat oatmeal. But the idea is there are inexpensive things out there that are healthier. So stay there, Sam. Stay there, Sam. I want you to read this.
Okay, let's see. We've got black cherry, artificial flavor, Jell-O. For ingredients, we have got sugar, gelatin, acetic acid, I believe, for tartness. Contains less than 2% of artificial flavor, disodium phosphate, and sodium citrate. Controls acidity. Fumaric acid, also for tartness, and then red 40 and blue 1.
Okay, so there's dyes in there. So thank you. Oh, I guess I don't need that. Okay, so that's good. Thank you, Sam, very much. Give Sam a hand for doing such a good job. Thank you. So I'm confessing that I have about a dozen of these in my closet. For Mr. Eats 60% of his diet is sugar over here. But so just so you know, probably most of you already know this, but the first ingredient is what there's most of in there. So the first ingredient was sugar. So it's mostly sugar. So as we look at the different things, I got this on sale for $2.99, and it is simply raw almonds. That's all that's in here. But then when you look at this and people say, oh, I'm allergic to peanut butter, sometimes they're allergic to the cottonseed or the soy or the different ingredients. This is not just peanut butter. It's not just peanuts. So there's a lot of things in here that the child might actually be reacting to. They might have a peanut allergy for sure, but sometimes it's a matter of the extra ingredients that are in here. So, and then this is my new favorite. Take a look at this. So I have a roommate right now, and she had this in her closet, and she's a really good, healthy eater. And I'm like, what are you doing with that? Okay, Sam, I need you again. This is like amazing.
So, for fruity sea stars, for ingredients we've got bean blend, navy beans, lentils, garbanzo beans, brown rice, dried cane syrup, natural flavor, salt, sunflower lecithin, vegetable juice for color, vitamin E, to maintain freshness, there we go, citric acid, turmeric, and paprika. Wow.
My point point is, you can't always judge a book by its cover. Look at the ingredients, okay? I was ready to judge her. Yeah, no, so I grew up with this kind of cereal, and not only did you have sugar cereal, but what did you do? You dumped a couple of teaspoons on the sugar cereal. All right, so the reason why this is important is, I mean, we see a lot of things in our society, a lot of cancer, a lot of different diseases and things that could be preventable. And so we want to teach our children, we can teach, here's where we can get out of balance. We're teaching them all these spiritual things, but we're not teaching them how to take care of their bodies. And I think that's so important, because if they're the most spiritual child in the world and they die young because they didn't eat properly, then really what good did we actually do? So all of these things I think are important for us to balance in our lives, and the physical is very important. And then clothing. Well, let me see. Did we do, okay, I'm sorry. The first fill-in under physical is, what are you feeding your children? The second one is avoid processed fast foods. Okay, learn to read labels. Did we do that already? Okay. So, and then the next area of physical is clothing should be clean and in style without compromising conviction. So we may not have designer clothes on, but they can always be clean, right? Even if you don't have a washing machine, you can wash your clothes in the bathtub or the shower, or we can always be clean. And so teaching them that. And I want to say, too, that clothing should be clean and in style. And when I say that, I don't mean that they need to compete with the world. I'm not saying that at all. But being holy doesn't mean being weird. Okay? So I think it's important that our children are able to, there's a definition of modesty that really has nothing to do with inappropriate body parts hanging out. There's a definition of modesty that includes drawing attention to yourself. And so there's times when your child could be dressing a certain way because you think that's a holy way to dress, and it's actually drawing more attention to them, and it really can sometimes distract from the gospel. And so that's all I'm going to say, is that really be discerning as parents, that modesty is not just about keeping everything covered. You know, we could be dressing weird and distracting people from what the Lord really wants to speak and say through us. Does that make sense? So, suggestions there: you can trade with friends. Secondhand shops are wonderful as long as you throw everything in the washer and dryer. You have to be careful of bed bugs these days. You can, as far as physical and feeding them, you can set aside an hour a week cleaning vegetables, chopping veggies together as a family, doing it together for those who can chop. If they can't chop, then get them washing the vegetables or putting the vegetables in a bag. There's a job everybody can do. You do it together as a family, it'll go quicker. Chopped veggies keep better in glass rather than plastic. Grill some chicken patties and individually wrap them for salads, Alfredo, or sandwiches. Beans freeze well and can be made in a crock pot weekly and placed in portions to be frozen. There's things that we can do to eat healthy and not have to spend so much money because our budget just won't allow us to. And then teaching your children the principle of honoring the Lord with their bodies. 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20. It talks about our body being a temple for the Lord. And I think that's very important. If the Lord told us to do it, I think it should be important, and it's something that we need to teach them, to take care of their bodies. Making investments. Now, I'm on page 7, 12 in the booklets, 7 in the handbook that you downloaded. Making investments into your child's life, spirit, soul, and body, creates a wonderful bond between parent and child. It is a vital key. This is why adoptive and foster parents can love their children just like it's their own flesh and blood, because there's a spiritual principle here. It's Matthew 6:21. It's your next fill-in. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be. It's a spiritual principle. What you treasure is where your heart will be drawn to. So let's say that you've got investment in the stock market. What are you going to be checking every day? Right. So where is your treasure? That's where your heart will be drawn to. So as you invest in your children, spirit, soul, and body, your heart is drawn to them. And so each one of us needs to look at what is the investments that need to be made in my children's spirit, soul, and body, and help me to do that. And maybe if you have a child that you feel, I'm just really having a hard time connecting with this child, you keep making those investments and your heart is drawn. Your heart is drawn in that situation. My goodness, some of the girls I loved the most were the girls that gave me the hardest time, because I had to keep making those investments and loving them and disciplining them and showing them their value. And before you know it, this girl that I just wanted to say goodbye, see you later, was my best friend, because the investment continued and continued and continued. And so we do that for our children. And again, through some seasons, what do parents do when the children are getting to be adolescents and they're starting to back up, trying to develop their own way of thinking, their own reasoning, their own values? We tend to back up too. We back up, they back up. We back up, they back up. And then what happens? There's a big chasm. And so I can remember one time when the Lord told me to paint a tiger on my daughter's wall. I could feel a little bit of that separation. And she loved tigers. And I said, do you want me to paint the tiger on your wall? Yeah. So we did it together. And it was a wonderful bonding experience. And I had to refrain from being angry when 2 years later she was done with tigers, because I had spent almost a year putting that tiger on the wall. But the point was, it was a beautiful experience that we had together. Find those ways to connect, especially with children that are drifting. Get into their world and find a way to connect. Find a balance in meeting your child's needs and discern between their needs and their wants. We know there's a difference, right, between needs and wants. And you know what? My Heavenly Father goes way beyond my needs and gives me things that I really don't need. I was praying for a spa. What do you call it, honey? A spa, a hot tub for my husband for the last 3 years. And just praying, Lord, you know, I had a little inheritance money given to me. I was thinking about using that for him. And he's like, no, we're not going to do that. And so just praying, and just last weekend, somebody came to us and said, I have a hot tub that I'd like to donate to you, to your ministry. Would you like it? Awesome. So that was a want. That's not a need. It feels great on his back that he struggles with, but it's not a need, it's a want. So sometimes our Abba, many times, frequently, our Abba goes beyond that. And so I know, again, this is something that we need to be careful of, because we want to make sure that we're having a balance. You know, if I ever bought my children anything that wasn't on the clearance rack, they were like, ooh, wow, this is awesome, because they were used to spending lots of time on the clearance racks. And so if you ever bought them something, because they just really needed it. They just needed that. They needed to know that they were valued and that they were more than the clearance rack. Sometimes we just have to do that. So if we give in to their constant demands, we'll create a dependent, immature spirit. Some of you who are raising girls and they want this fancy shampoo, like it's always a different one every month, let them earn some money and buy it themselves. We get Suave in the house. We have the 99-cent shampoo. And if you want something above that, save your money and buy it. Because it was a wonderful experience to watch my children grow up and then decide what they wanted to value, because they were spending the money on it, not mom and dad. And so I think that creates really a responsibility and a stewardship in them. And you can do that at a young age. Start teaching them how to be responsible stewards by not always giving them what they want. And we see now, as it says here, the create dependent, immature spirit. They call it prolonged adolescence. They call it late launchers. They call it all kinds of things. But really what it is a struggle with entitlement. It's a first world problem, right? Where they're constantly being fed something that they're demanding, and then we see that they're not growing into mature adults. And then when we don't meet the basic needs of our children, we can nurture an independent spirit and a false sense of security. So if there's a child that's not getting those emotional, physical, and spiritual needs met, and again we said that they can be prone to wander, But they can also decide, okay, well, I guess I'm my own parent. And I guess I'm on my own for this. And I guess I can do this on my own. And so there's kind of like a kind of an independence, but it's a false sense of independence. And it's not a real security, it's a false sense of security. And so we have to be careful if we're not evaluating spirit, soul, and body needs of our children. When the basic needs are met, we see security, and we'll see that in Psalm 16. I don't know about you, but I want my children to say that of my home, that the boundary lines were actually pleasant. I appreciate the boundary lines that were set for me, and they may not appreciate it when you're setting them, but can they look back and say, how about David? Do you think he looked back and said, thank you, Lord, for the boundary that I should be sticking with my own wife? Thank you for that boundary, because when I violated that boundary, I didn't just do adultery, I did murder. And so I have found that those boundary lines are really in pleasant places. And within those boundary lines, there's pleasant places for our children. And that's what we want to create, that place of safety. Spiritually, physically, and emotionally, there's a place of safety for them. Okay, what we're going to do now is, once again, take a brief bathroom break or refreshment break if you need it. And then in your tables, we're going to take about just 10 minutes on this one. Maybe introduce yourselves to each other if you haven't, and then share a little bit about how you're doing the spiritual investments in your children, okay? So like, even though yours are not here yet, you've already given them a name, you've already, I'm sure you're praying for this baby, and probably, if I know you, reading the word to the baby. So all of these things, I want you to share with each other very briefly, and just, you'll give each other ideas. And if you're not doing that right now, please don't feel condemned. Just receive what your brothers and sisters are saying and get some ideas, and just be thankful for those ideas. So if we can just take a little break, and then we'll have 10 minutes for you guys to share at your table. So this will be a 15-minute break, 10 minutes at the table, sharing what you're doing spiritually to invest in your families.